Why is it that when it comes to the discussion of digital versus physical game collecting, or just buying games in general, it is very common for somebody to have to be anti the other when you could just be pro one, you know? So for example, I'll show you a comment in a second. Anyone else think physical releases are stupid and much prefer digital? I can't remember the last time I bought a physical game. Digital is just better. Why, to be pro digital and prefer digital, do you also have to dislike and hate on physical collecting? As gamers, we should all want as many different ways to be able to buy and access our games as we physically can, because the more different ways that we can buy a game, the better chance we have of a few different things. A, being able to actually play it regardless of what platform we're on or where we're at in the world, like geographically, but also two, what the game actually costs, because if the game is only sold in one place and are harder to get hold of, now the prices can be pretty much whatever the person selling it want them to be. Off the top of my head, for example, think about Nintendo. Nintendo games hold their value really quite well, and I think a big reason behind that, not like the core reason, not the only reason obviously, but like one of the reasons behind that is they're not as readily available as some other systems are. They're just not. Especially these days now that it is kind of difficult to go to a shop and buy a physical game. When you buy your Nintendo stuff, where do you buy your Nintendo stuff from? The Nintendo Online Store? You know? For example, if we are only ever able to buy, at some point, if we're only ever able to buy digital games from the PlayStation Store or the Xbox Marketplace, they are then able to charge whatever price they want and we just have to deal with it. And that's not even talking about the fact that some games get delisted, which causes them to not be playable. For example, all of the Activision Spider-Man games got delisted, which means that they are not purchasable on the Xbox Live Marketplace anymore. So if you didn't buy them when they were available, now your only option is these physical games. And what does that mean for them? It means that their prices have shot through the roof. This is a £100 game now. And it's because your only option is buying it physically. If we had more options, if we were able to go elsewhere, if we were able to get it in a variety of ways, the price wouldn't get like this. There have been some instances where something is released digital only to later be delisted or removed that cause the entire system that it is on to be worth several times more than it's supposed to be. For example, right now, go on eBay and search PlayStation 4 with PT installed and look at the prices of those versus just a regular PlayStation 4. PT was a playable demo for a Silent Hill game that was never released, a collaboration between Hideo Kojima and Norman Reedus. And it got cancelled about a decade ago now. And unless you keep it downloaded to your console, you can't re-download it. It wasn't even one of them where, like the Spider-Man games, once you've bought it, you own it to download whenever you like. It was a case of if you ever delete it off of your console, regardless of whether or not you have previously installed it before, you can no longer play that game ever again. I had it. It's still in my library according to my PlayStation account, but I can't choose to download it because that's just the power that they have. When you don't have the disc in your hand, you don't physically own that game. If, for example, if Steam shuts down and all the servers go away, if you've got thousands of games available in your Steam library and they're not downloaded to your system, you can't play them anymore. And this is not me saying digital is bad. This is me saying there are pros and cons of both, because there are pros and cons to both. I think it is silly in a lot of things in life, really, to be all the way one side or all the way the other. And this comment comes from TikTok, where that is a thought process that's entirely very common. TikTok comment section thought processes are often in a very binary, it has to be one way or another approach, and whichever way you are not is typically considered bad or evil. Like, it's always in TikTok comments where people are unable to see the perspective of the other side, and that is something I always try to do. It's see the perspective of the other side. So whenever I get a comment where clearly that person has not done that or is incapable of doing that, it confuses me. Like, how did we get there in the first place, sort of thing? I can't find it, but I had another comment that was complaining about the fact that I said that I miss midnight releases of games, and somebody commented on that saying, quoting me, saying something along the lines of, I miss this experience that almost no one else ever had. Guys watching this, right? 80% of the people that watch my YouTube videos are over the age of 25, and I'm willing to bet that if you're a gamer over the age of 25 that likes watching YouTube videos in your spare time, you have probably been to the midnight release of a game at least once. It didn't even have to be a big game. Like, Call of Duty, Battlefield, Halo, and all the like sports games always had pretty decently sized midnight releases. But back in the day, I would used to just go with my mum to Tesco at midnight to get whatever game it was that I wanted, regardless of whether or not it was like a big deal, because at midnight they would sell you the game, because legally they kind of had to once it was the date of the release. And yeah, to say that this is one of those perspective things, isn't it? These comments come from people that are typically young. They don't remember. They lack the ability to think or perceive the fact that somebody else may have had a different experience to them, and that the way that things are now are perhaps not always the way that they have always been, or will always continue to be as well, would be a silly thing to assume. And again, I am not anti-digital. I like digital games. I just like owning things physically more. I like that as long as it's available, my digital game can never break, you know? Occasionally I put in an old disc and for some reason it just doesn't work. That doesn't happen with digital games, or at least it's not supposed to. To be fair though, on Xbox One especially, I have encountered some times where digital games don't work the way the physical games did, or at least not as... just for some reason they would just break. Things didn't work properly sometimes. I can't lie to you, it almost makes me a little bit sad that like there are entire generations of gamers now that will probably never experience some of the things that I got to experience, and things that, especially I see this on TikTok all the time, things that are not okay are now seen as normal and accepted. For example, I made a video a while ago when Dragon Ball Sparking Zero was announced that this had better come as a complete game. You ain't allowed to rip out transformations from this game or characters and stories and sell them back to us as DLC, like they have now done, 4 times? With the 2 Xenoverse games, Fighters, and like maybe one of the others as well, Kakarot, they, at this point, love trying to make extra money by selling you content that should have been in the game at release. And people on TikTok will defend it, and I can only assume that the people defending it are young, because they're coming from it from a standpoint where never in their life have they experienced a time where that wouldn't have been normal. And it's not their fault, and it's not me being condescending, it's just that is the way that their life has been. Like, for example, right, you guys watching this video, because again, most of you are older, would not consider Red Dead Redemption 2 to be an old game. But that game is not far off 10 years old. I think that game came out in 2007. I'm going to Google it. Right, okay, Red Dead 2 came out in 2018, yeah? So that is 6 years ago. 6 years is long enough that if somebody is watching a video on TikTok and they are 18 years old, that they were 13 when Red Dead 2 came out. 13 to 18 is a life-changing amount of years in terms of like that time span. You are a completely different person over that, you know? You remember things, like, it's dramatic. It's something you never forget. Because how old was I when GTA 5 came out? Because that feels like forever ago. 11 years, 2013? So I'd have been 15. That feels like such a long time ago. When is Prime Fortnite? 2016? 17? If Prime Fortnite is 2016, and this is off the top of my head, that is 8 years ago. A 20-year-old that might be watching a video on TikTok about gaming, their Prime Fortnite was 2000 and... They were 12 years old, if it's been 8 years. There are experiences that were normal for us that are not normal to them. No, that are not normal to us, that are normal to them, that they don't have a problem with because they never experienced it being any different. They're like, of course they're going to sell the DLC characters. They shouldn't be DLC characters in Sparking Zero. The entire purpose of those Tenkaichi games was, look at this massive character roster. You didn't have to go and buy them. You earned them. You created them through Evolution Z and all that sort of thing. We live in a gaming era where game companies make more money after a game's release by selling things to you in post than they do make money from the game's sales alone. Like when I was a teenager, when I was a kid, that was how game companies made money, is at most maybe they had a season pass. But a season pass usually was just one way of buying 4 pieces of DLC for the price of 3. You know, like Call of Duty would have a map pack that would come out every quarter, and if you bought the season pass, you'd basically pay 3/4 of the price of what 4 of them would have cost individually. But then battle passes became a big thing because of Fortnite, and Fortnite is the only one of them that should have been really allowed to do it because it's a free game. But I think it's absurd that games like Call of Duty, that are £70 games every year, have battle passes and things like that. They are not... You shouldn't be paying full price for a game and then having to pay every few months to access more content within the game that realistically for a decade was just in the game at release. This is why I'm kind of looking forward to Black Ops 6, because it looks like they're going to fix a lot of this, where stuff that was previously sold back to you over time is just going to be in the game from release. And I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to do at least one prestige of Black Ops 6 and record it, because I think it could be fun. I want you guys to comment down below, provided you have been to midnight releases, what your favourite memory of a midnight release was. I miss the days. I remember I would Skype school to play the games that I would get at midnight. I would try and sometimes finish a game before the next day even began. I'd stay up all night. I remember I did it with Assassin's Creed 3. I remember playing the hell out of Borderlands 2 at midnight release. I went to so many different midnight releases because I just go at midnight. Because I've spoke a bit about like what my childhood was like before. Like staying up early into the hours of the morning was pretty common because of my alcoholic dad, and we'd have to go and find him. So like my mother never really had a problem with taking me to Tesco at midnight, because on any other day of the week we might have to go and find my drunken dad while he was stumbling around the streets at like 2 a.m. So like midnight to go to Tesco, yeah, piece of piss, dead easy, Yeah. I don't know what my favourite gaming memory was when it comes to midnight releases, but there were a lot of them. It was always very interesting getting into a lobby when like Call of Duty had first come out, and at the midnight release. The midnight releases of Call of Duty was so busy. Like, even in 2016, midnight releases were still a thing at that point, just about. Because I worked at Tesco for a few years, between 2016 and 2020, I think. And I had to like be the staff member doing the midnight releases for a lot of the FIFA games, a couple of the Battlefield games, and Call of Duty. And I just... There were still people going to them, even 2016. And 2016 doesn't feel like it was that long ago, but it's been 8 years. If somebody's 18, a legal adult, old enough to drink, old enough to do everything they want to do, they were 12 years old back then. So like that 18-year-old watching that video on TikTok has no memory possibly of midnight releases or when games just released complete. Like, does anybody remember the drama, like probably a decade and a half ago now, where games were being released physically with content on the disc that was locked off behind a paywall? It was on-disc DLC. The industry was in an uproar about it, and realistically, from there on in, it only ever got worse. Like, them ripping out content prior to the game's release and selling it back to you as DLC became not just like a scummy practice, but something that became very normal and very common, in terms of the fact that now 18-year-olds and younger, they won't know that is abnormal. They expect a battle pass. They expect to have to pay a ton of money extra beyond the price of the game. In my head, I want to buy the game and that be it. That should be it. You shouldn't have to buy all this extra stuff. Maybe if a few years down the line they're still producing brand new content for the game, then yeah, sure. Like, I'm all for expansions in terms of like the Borderlands games or the Fallout games with their expansions, because those were big things. An example of fair enough is Shadow of the Erdtrees DLC. While it wasn't for me, I can recognise that it was still good and more of what people loved, and therefore was worth the money to people. That is fair, because it took a long time. Shadow of the Erdtree was not something that was complete prior to the game's release that they pulled out so that they could sell it back to you at a later date, like has become the norm. It is not something that players expected to be in the game because the game is based on existing source material. Back to the Dragon Ball example. Some people I've seen were saying that they hope that the movie characters and the GT characters are in there and that you don't have to buy them. And it's like, I would hope that you don't have to buy them, because any character, any transformation, any content in Dragon Ball Z that exists prior to the start of Dragon Ball Super, or Dragon Ball Z Battle of Gods anyway, is older than me because of that massive hiatus they had. It's crazy to think that sometimes when I talk about Dragon Ball Z or look into things about Dragon Ball Z. But Dragon Ball Z was completely finished before I was even born. So decades later, for the content that should just be in the game at release to not be in the game at release, to be sold back to you at a later date when games are already crazy expensive, is insane. And there are entire generations of people now that, because it's been going on for so long, that it is normal to them, that they don't know any different. And again, I'm not slating young people here. It's not their fault. It just is the way the world is. And we we just seem like old people moaning about things changing and times moving on. But it's hard to disagree with that gaming practices were better when we were younger, you know? At most, the worst thing that would happen when it comes to these gaming practices was they might resell the same game as a souped up version of it, perhaps. Like, how many different versions of Street Fighter 4 are there? Or Mortal Kombat, perhaps. But you see what I mean? Yeah. I miss midnight releases. If you guys liked the video, do be sure to subscribe, click the follow button, and I'll see you later.